Hello and welcome to Thinking Out Loud. I'm your co-host, Nathan Rittenhouse.
And I'm your co host, Cameron McAllister. In this episode, we talk about weariness with the news and why that might be the case, why increasing numbers of us are watching or scrolling less in news territory. But then we also turn to a consideration of the recent scandal involving former Newsboys and DC Talk member Michael Tate. And that is a difficult, but I think important and ultimately hopeful and helpful conversation. As always, like, share, and subscribe. And if you find value in what we do and you want to support our work, you can do that by going to www.toltogether.com.
And on today's episode, we're going to talk about the Epstein files. No, we're not. I just did that to see the look on Cameron's face as I said that. No, actually,
Expression.
pained expression. We are weary with the news. And I say that as personal reflections and as a lot of the feedback that I've gotten from several of you who are just kind of getting tired of it all. And I think there are a number of features at play there, Cameron. Um, Different stories that I think in the past would have been interesting to us, but just don't seem as interesting. Um, Basically, I think there are two parts of that. One is most stories are incomplete. We don't have the information we really know to make any really informed decision about it. And even if we could, it might not really affect our lives, and we don't think we're in control of that. So there's just a skepticism in general of what it is that can be known and a lack of trust in the people who are telling us the information. So there's that part of it. And then there's a part of it that the news is just a lot of humans humaning. And at a certain phase of life, you're not surprised anymore. So you can say, oh, look at this tech CEO and the HR director of a astronomy company having an affair at a Coldplay concert on the Kiss cam. Okay. Do I think people have a fair
Yeah.
yeah, like, I so what A, Cameron, am I reading this right? Or B, what's wrong with me?
Well, as the sage of Ecclesiastes said, for the watching of much news is wearying to the soul, right? maybe that's a later addition. Well, and I think another piece would be just the sheer glut of information. I mean, never we've talked about this, never in the history of humanity have we had access to such a panorama of news all the time. So we have a finite attention span, and we have finite reservoirs of compassion and empathy as well. I mean, there's only so much we can care about. So these are all just natural human limitations, and I do think they come into play as we watch the news. But I think also weariness, because what real tangible difference can we make as we sift through all of this? Or even as we think about some tech CEO and his coworker at a Coldplay concert. Yes, marriage is very important and marital fidelity is important, but when you look at something like that, for instance, Nathan, just to take that as an example, is there really it's hard not to think cynically about it, because as is typical with these kinds of scandals, it just turns into a big PR nightmare. So it's really concerned much more with appeasing the constituency, making sure the board are happy, and that the company doesn't come off looking bad. And so you have the typical statement from the person, I'm taking some, please respect the privacy of my family. I'm taking some time to evaluate and think about my life. I mean, nowhere in none of this sounds like real human speech.
Yeah, nor does it sound like
Because
real human
it's
caring.
not.
It's
No,
why is it in
because
the
it's
news?
not.
It's because it's entertainment. The news
Correct.
is now entertainment. And so you pick your um i- yeah, I can't think of anything to say about that entire story that surprises me in any way or any way in which that would change my life because I think at this point I have a pretty clear understanding of how a human's human. So
And what happened
also,
what happened afterwards?
what culturally are we judging this based on? Like, hey, it's two consenting adults.
Mm,
What's the secular scandal here?
mhm.
Ah,
Yeah, and
it's so
I don't wanna
what's
sound
what's the phrase? Nothing burger, I think. I don't want to sound callous about adultery and affairs in people's lives and
right.
relationships and all that. Like, I get that. I don't know these people. why would this gets national media attention out of all the other 42,000 affairs that happen on the same day? Um, it's just because they got caught and everybody thinks it's funny. So,
Right, and
entertainment
becomes a meme,
all over again.
and there's the proof that it's entertainment is the way it's turned into a meme and all of the different jokes that it spurs on. Yeah, and it really just to reinforce what you're saying there, Nathan, I think some of what we're saying does run the risk sometimes of sounding callous, but what we're trying to do here is point to a very odd tension or a double standard, perhaps, because on the one hand, we live in a cultural moment that just extols the virtues of sexual license, and personal liberty and freedom. Do whatever you want, do what makes you feel good. But then on the other hand, something like this happens and then suddenly we have this odd kind of moralism that comes in and we want
Yeah,
to.
see, but I think it's all fake. I think it is total fake virtue signaling. Like, I don't know what that phrase is.
Mhm.
I think this is a step beyond virtue signaling because I'm acting like I care about a virtuous category in which I don't actually care. I
Mm,
There ought to be a word for that. Um, and I'm not saying this me personally. It just seems like
mhm.
this is the logical conclusion of the fundamental paradigm and social imaginary of the culture that we live in. And so it's there's this time where my grandpa after World War II was taking a bunch of chickens and feed to actually he went to Algeria and was taking them, I think, into Germany. It's after war, everybody's starving. So they loaded up a ship full of chickens and feed and then incubators. And this is back in the day when it took a little while to cross the ocean. So they're going across the ocean with a ship full of chickens, chicken feed, and incubators. They get to the port. Actually, they got to a port in Greece, and halfway across the ocean, the chickens started laying eggs. So they get to the port in Greece, and the guy's like, "Okay, you have the manifest for the chickens, you have the manifest for the chicken feed, and you have the manifest for the incubator, but you don't have clearance for bringing eggs into the country. Like, where did you get these eggs?" And it was one of those like, "Do you know what you get when you add chicken feed to chickens? You get eggs. Like, nobody's trying to smuggle anything here. Like, this is the logical conclusion of how chickens plus chicken feed work. You get eggs." And clearly they were looking for a bribe scenario kind of thing, and it's kind of funny how that whole story ended and worked out. But this is like in my mind, Cameron, that is the analogy of our time of like we have a cultural paradigm of morality, secular philosophy of what it means to be human. Then we add other humans to it. We take the chicken feed, we add it to the chickens, and then we all sit back like, can you believe eggs happened? Like, I think that is part of my weariness of the news of like, yeah, this is all of this seems to be a direct result of everything that we've laid the groundwork for generations. And so anybody who has remotely been thinking about the fundamental structures of cause and effect looks at this and is like, yeah, that seems about right. Why is this newsworthy?
And certainly it also seems to be the case that, I mean, you can make a comment on this but you have no real personal investment in it at all. I mean, many people have pointed this out, but most of us, the vast majority of us don't know either of these people at all. And so it's very easy to kind of cast aspersions, but you have no real personal investment in any of these stories. How can you? Most of these stories have no real tangible connection with your day-to-day life. I think that's another feature of weariness when it comes to the news. There's no real connection. I think there's a growing sense that news, responsible news consumption that needs to happen, it really involves the news most relevant to you and your immediate community and circumstances. Now, that's not a recipe for quietism or burying your head in the sand and not paying attention to some of the major events that are happening around the world. Of course, that would nobody's saying that. But what many people are saying is that if you want to be more involved in matters where you actually can make a difference, then local news, and I mean immediate local news, your community, your neighborhood news, that kind
They're
of thing,
redoing the
is
intersection
going to
at the end
be
of your street. That matters.
precisely. That matters. Yes, and you can probably make a difference there.
Mhm.
So all of that, I think there's a shift in that direction toward the more local, and I'm aware that local is a buzzword, but it's not a bad buzzword here in these circumstances. I think there's a change happening there, but I would definitely say certainly from anecdotal experience, Nathan, that most people I'm talking to who are around our age or younger have significantly reduced their news consumption.
Mhm. Okay, well, let's talk about a category where you and I were discussing something, and you're like, I don't want to talk about it just because I'm tired of it happening. There also is a fatigue of stuff that we acknowledge is bad. We're frustrated, and we probably do need to think through it again. And here I'm referencing the scandal within the Christian music world of Michael Tate, formerly of DC Talk and the
Yeah.
Newsboys. I actually didn't know anything about this. I was working on actually was preaching Sunday on the "You're the light, you're the salt of the earth, you're the light of the world," and that little passage in Matthew 5 ends, therefore, um, basically, let your light
Mm.
shine, do your good deeds so that people may see them and praise your Father in heaven. And I was thinking, oh, you know what? The best song that really encapsulates this is the old, I think, 1999 song by the Newsboys, "Shine." Um, and you should go back and listen if you want some retro late 90s Christian, whatever category the Newsboys are. And I was saying something to that to my one of my brothers, and he's like, "The Newsboys aren't doing so hot right now." I'm like, "Oh yeah, what's up?" And he's like, "Well, have you followed the thing with Michael Tate?" And I hadn't. Cameron, I think you know a little bit more of the inside scoop of that. Could you kind of summarize um, recent developments there?
It started actually with, if I'm not mistaken, with somebody coming forward on TikTok. And this is actually how I caught wind of it because I came across this gentleman's videos, and he was making some very serious allegations. This is a man who I'll leave his name out. Again, I'm going to give paint a general picture because if you want to see the details, you can easily any listener can easily look all of this up. But he was making first of all, he was pointing out that Michael Tate is gay and that that's been an open secret in Nashville for a long time. But he was making more serious allegations about sexual assault, that sort of thing.
Hmm.
And so when those videos came out, he was ahead of I believe I mean journalists were at work on some of this. They had a dossier on Michael Tate. But in light of those revelations, then articles began to be published, and then Michael Tate himself issued a statement saying largely the substance of a lot of this is true, and I need to earnestly repent, that kind of thing. But then allegations of an even more serious nature were put forward. And basically, the long and short of it is, if these claims are substantiated and there's enough evidence, Michael Tate may very well end up in prison. So that's how serious this has been. And so naturally, this has ignited a very serious discussion on, in this case, on not just on the evangelical subculture, but also on the Christian recording industry, which is a significant player. It was more so in the past. And I know, I mean, if you can think back to an album like Jesus Freak, that was a in evangelical circles and in the evangelical subculture, that was a monumental album. It sold massively. The same is true, of course, of Newsboys and their albums. But I think some of the items to bring forward here, Nathan, are that I think will have a particular interest to us, and I think that I'd like to hear your thoughts on. When I was younger, so I missed you'll have to remember, I to put this into context, both Nathan and I are kinda uniquely outsiders when it comes to evangelical subculture for different reasons.
Hmm.
Nathan grew up in an has a different ecclesial background, and I grew up across the pond in Vienna, Austria. And it's true, I was a missionary kid over there, and so there were traces of this, but I remember I had never heard of DC Talk until some of my teachers at our small Christian school, who were American teachers who were recent transplants to Vienna, began to tell us about these musicians. And then my dad went on a trip speaking in America and brought home with him a whole treasure trove of Christian CDs for me. Jars of Clay and DC Talk were among them. And so, but as you begin to look into this stuff, it was very much marketed and styled as a wholesome alternative to the secular music market, right? So If you want something that's a little bit more rock oriented, something with elements of perhaps a little bit of grunge or something. I mean, Jesus Freak the song, the riff is remarkably similar to Nirvana's "Smells Like Teen Spirit." I mean, it's very hard to now, everybody's ripping everybody off. Kurt Cobain from Nirvana admitted that he ripped "Smells Like Teen Spirit" off of Boston's "More Than a Feeling." So, I'm not casting any kind of major criticisms there, but it's clearly derivative there a little bit. But this was my point is this is a Christian alternative, a wholesome alternative to the less than wholesome secular stuff. And it turns out, the way this is being talked about, Nathan, as the curtain is parted, we're seeing that it turns out, hey, it's not really any different at all. This is just a big industry and it's all about money. And if you look closely at these kinds of cases, you'll see that people were covering stuff up, people who should have known better. I mean, there are allegations that this kind of stuff was brought to the attention of Michael Tate's manager, for instance, Nathan, and that he either downplayed or minimized or tried to outright just not deal with it at all so that he could avoid a scandal. And, the implication being it's just all about money. So this is not really any kind of alternative culture at all. I've already said enough, I think. There's a lot to discuss here. There's also the relevant fact that Nathan and I have, while not music industry insiders, we have had a front row seat to a major scandal in the evangelical world, one that brought down the biggest apologetics ministry in the world. We worked with Ravi Zacharias and we're there for 10 years. So I think it's relevant to bring that in here as well as we talk about this.
We're on the topic of weariness, and it's interesting that in the first case, we had a weariness because when we're talking about the affair of like the CEO caught on the Kiss Cam at the Coldplay concert, we're saying, yeah, that's the logical conclusion. Like this makes sense to me. That seems to be consistent. When you have scandals within the Christian world, it's the reverse of that, saying that this seems to me to be inconsistent. And so those are different
Mhm.
types of responses because one seems like the logical consequence of something, and the other one either seems like a deviation of what should be true, or it is the logical consequence. And how you answer which of those goes to the credibility of the degree to which you think Christianity actually changes somebody's life and expresses itself not just in their stage persona and platform, but in the details of the quiet part of their lives. And so the that is a different shift of like, is one the logical conclusion of a way of seeing the world, and is one totally at odds with the way in which I'm professing to see the world. Um, and both of those are tragic to me, I think, at the same time. So the
Mm.
weariness feels the same, even though we're coming into it from different angles.
Yeah. There's also a deep weariness of, for me at least, the public face of Christianity in the United States right now. The way because one of a friend of ours and former colleague used to say these kinds of scandals will always create a lot more work when we're speaking and
Mhm.
particularly when we're speaking with non-believers, because now, yes, you have to work through this, and it's as much as the impulse is to say, well, you know, it's kind of like the no true Scotsman problem here. Well, he wasn't behaving as a real Christian and all of that, but when you just continually have this media parade of scandals, it does create a plausibility problem. And it is still true, though, to say you take a step back, you want to evaluate the truth, the veracity of Christianity. The one to whom you must look is Jesus Christ, not necessarily people proclaiming his name. That remains true. But the truth is also that these kinds of scandals do hurt the prophetic witness of Christians. And so
Sure.
that's a source of weariness and sadness for me as well. But we can also take a few steps back and just recognize the perennial truth that influence and power are incredibly dangerous things. They're not always bad, but they do have it does seem to be the case. It distinctly seems to be the case, Nathan, that most people are not equipped to handle a whole lot of notoriety.
Yep.
And we have for a long time, I think we've said this before, we have for a long time, I think with the best of intentions, in North America, a lot of the evangelical world has really stressed positive cultural influence and has been very successful at cultural influence for a long time. And I think the results now are decidedly mixed. You have had some, of course, some good has been done, and I'm but we're also at a place now where we want to count the cost a little bit because if you want cultural influence in a culture that is deeply confused and disordered in its thinking, we have to be very reflective and careful about the terms of that influence, and what has to be done to keep doors open, so to speak. So I'm also wary of my own voice here, of repeating myself and
Well,
saying things
because we've had this
I meant to say for a while.
conversation. I was trying to think of similar, other than the RZIM stuff. We talked about Amy Grant. We've talked about, s- but
Sure, yeah,
here's the question that's haunting me, that one of my brothers asked me is, what is the real future, or is there such a thing as a famous Christian? Um,
it's a
and
really good question. Yeah,
the so I want to say yes to that, Cameron, and I think
sure.
there are people who have gained a level of notoriety for good things and have lived lives of integrity. However, the list is longer in my mind immediately, of that, like you said, anybody that you throw in front of a 40,000 member crowd and you pay them millions of dollars and they bounce all over the world and aren't embedded in a local community and they are the focus of attention everywhere they go, man, that is a
Yeah,
recipe that very, very few humans can handle. And like it's not just Christians. I mean, you look at all sorts of very, like, how do people handle fame in general? Yeah, there are usually drugs involved. Like, I mean, it's like
mhm, yeah,
people were made to worship, not be worshiped. And when you start feeling like it turns out when you try to be a god, you become a terrible human. And nobody sets out in
and
their mind to think that, but even if they
no,
subconsciously are embodying that, there's a lesson to be learned there for ourselves of, w your church pianist has a better, um, possibility of not going down this lifestyle,
yeah,
even if they are a very skilled musician and maybe even have more musical talent than somebody who is famous, and nobody's heard of them outside of your church as a musician, and they facilitate the worship of the triune God and are also part of making casseroles
yeah.
and visiting people in the nursing home, and your kids play with their kids, and it's it's just different. And it struck me,
Well,
Cameron, if I got this right, just one more thing and then get you to finish this off, is that when
sure.
Ravi died, to much fanfare and acclaim, multi-page obituary, it struck me that the word church did not appear in his obituary.
Hmm,
And I thought, this is an interesting category where we have a famous Christian who wasn't
mhm.
part of a church. And that just stuck in my mind at that time. And then later I was like, I see how this goes. And so I almost wonder, like, if you're listening to this and you're in ministry or you're aspiring to influence or engage the world, maybe one of the greatest blessings that God could give you is for your fame to come after you die.
Hmm. Or after you die, or not at all, or later in life where you perhaps can
And
handle it
handle it.
better. I
Yeah.
wanna so 2 things I wanna say here. So for one celebrity who I think has been uniquely forthcoming on this topic of how he is not equipped to be the god people treat him like is Justin Bieber. Fascinating, just very honest, especially in later years. I mean, it's very apparent right now that he's not doing well. You can take one look at his kind of anxious and now haggard face, and you can see that, but he's been very outspoken on that topic, clearly wrestling a lot spiritually over the years. I mean, the media made a whole lot a big deal when he had Tim Keller's book on marriage in his hand in a cafe, but I just think he's one I would point to who's been quite honest about the cost of being treated like a god, and very unsparing when it comes to his descriptions of the kind of person he's been in the past, and often, and I mean, he's clearly not through what he's going through right now. But the other person I want to bring up is a musician I have loved for a long time. Now, confession, well, this isn't so much a confession. This will surprise absolutely nobody. I've never been a real big Christian music fan, at least, or the stuff that's marketed as Christian music.
Gasp,
I'm
gasp.
it's I guess I'm deaf to its music. Okay, it doesn't work for me, and that's okay. But a musician I've admired for a long time, is one of my favorites, is Nick Cave. And I've listened to Nick Cave since I was in 7th grade. That's how cool I am. But anyway, Nick Cave in recent years has been on an absolutely fascinating spiritual journey, and he represents a real contrast to what we're seeing in some of these cases. So horrible things have happened to him in recent years. He's lost 2 sons in recent years. One of them plummeted to his death off of a cliff while he was high on drugs. I mean, so the circumstances were awful. He's been through deep, deep grief. In this process, it has become a kind of occasion for a spiritual renewal in his life. Now, Nick Cave in his early records was very chaotic, very, very dark. Records like Your Funeral, My Trial, or From Her to Eternity, chaotic, very dark, obviously very talented, right? But he was addicted to heroin. He was a chaotic kind of personality. He would occasionally lash out at audience members and shows. I mean, just he was a dangerous guy.
This is seventh
But
grade
now,
Cameron, everybody. So
that's sounds
there's been an arc here of development. Carry on.
right. But now in his 60s now though, he's become this sort of elder statesman of grief, but also this sort of sage figure. He has this feature on his website called the Red Hand Files, where people can write him letters, and many of them are angry, disgruntled letters. Oh, your music now is really sentimental and cheesy and boring. Side note, it's not. But his music isn't about darkness and outlaws and drug use anymore. It's about beauty, the fragile beauty of life. See, that's what's been so surprising. He hasn't gone down a road of bitterness and despair, having lost so much. It has restored for him a vision of the fragile beauty of life and the goodness of God. Now, I wrote an article about him recently, and I use a sentence in there along the lines of, if you sat him down with the elders of my church, they would definitely raise their eyebrows at some of the things he said. So I'm not saying he's necessarily going to be the poster child for Christianity, but his vision, his compassionate vision of humanity, and what keeps drawing him to church now, is definitely from above. And
Okay.
the inspiration, so he's taken an amazing turn in his life, and anyway, so yeah, now that he's in the sort of twilight years of his fame, not only is he handling it well, he is giving so much of himself away. It reminds me a little bit of C.S. Lewis with the voluminous correspondence, just answering all those letters. He does that on his website with these red hand files, and writes very compassionately back to people who say, "Hey, your music sucks now, it's boring." He actually answers those emails. So I don't know whether it's sufficiently clear why I'm bringing him in, but I think he represents a kind of beautiful antidote to some
Okay.
of
I
what
have a
we're
theory.
seeing.
Let me try this.
Yeah, yeah, let's hear it.
So is it possible that what we're actually looking for in the world is role models? And the news does not give us role models. In fact, it crushes our role models. We're looking for accurate descriptions of reality, and the news, you're like, I don't even know if this is an accurate description of reality. It's the reason that you cringed a little bit at the Christian music of your time, but thought that other bands were more accurately describing the human experience. It's why you thought the existentialists were more fascinating than Christian writers at one point in your life too, because you're saying they're doing a better job of describing the darkness that I see and the hopelessness in the world around me, and this just connects dots better than some other visions. And so, if the news is entertainment, fine, it's entertainment. People like soap operas. There's your soap opera. Like there's that. There's the scandal, the fake, whatever. So there's entertainment, but then there is, I think, a yearning for why is Joe Rogan the most popular podcaster? Why do most people get their news from Joe Rogan and Theo Vaughn? And Stephen Colbert's show is ending. It was just
Sure.
announced this week.
Yep.
That is a massive like people trust Theo Vaughn more than they trust Stephen Colbert. That's why.
Mm.
Theo Vaughn seems like a more normal human, and Stephen Colbert seems scripted and probably overly paid for the opinions that he needs to have to be on certain networks. So it's that whole like who do you really trust? Who do you really look up to? Who's really describing the world as you experience it yourself? And we're looking for a tribe. We're looking for a group of people who process reality in the same way that we are. And the news either puts things so far away from us that that's not our tribe or that's not our people, or it pops bubbles in all of our heroes, and so that's no fun either. That it becomes weary because it's I think we've been using our screens to find community and to find role models and to find direction on how to live well, and it has continuously let us down in our lives, and so now we're just getting tired of it.
Mm.
The antidote to this seems
Yeah.
pretty clear, but might sound a little preachy. Over to you, Cameron. I don't know. Is my analysis
Well,
plausible there?
I mean, I think we're also we're at a place now where the more glossy, the more the higher the production values, the less trustworthy something feels, I think, for many people, because it seems like it's a neatly packaged product. Now, it's worth pointing out that the money behind a Joe Rogan or a Theo Vaughn, even though they are sort of styled as outsiders, is
Oh
still
yeah, no, 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 no,
massive.
no.
I mean, these
I'm not.
yeah.
Yeah,
But but you're right. Part of their appeal is that they're outsiders, and they are outsiders in the sense that they are dissenting voices in many ways. And somebody like a Theo Vaughn does have much more of a kind of regular, I mean, guy. He's certainly way less polished than a Stephen Colbert, right? But the yeah, the search for community is clearly happening, and the fact that it's often directed online again makes a sort of sad sense, but is apt is I mean, it's just it's going to end in frustration. Once again, we're coming to a place now where people are drawing, I think, the very obvious conclusion. We've got to move away from the information superhighway, away from our devices, away from the fire hose of the news, and back toward the people, real flesh and blood people around us. And we've got to get back to a place. And that's why I mean, what's part of what's so compelling about Nick Cave is he's saying, "Yeah, you should go to church." That's what I'm doing. I'm going my wife and I we're going to church, and it's not always a comfortable experience, but we have to go worship. And if you're going to go to church, this goes back to what took you aback with the Robbie thing, Nathan. And this is something we come back to often on Thinking Out Loud. If you're going to church, a local gathering and congregation, you belong to this local congregation, this group of people. And in there, I mean, within that commitment are all sorts of wonderful benefits. There is accountability, there's a safety net. These people will take care of you, but you are
and
able
there
to
are
engage
guidelines
with
for
reality.
rehabilitation when you fall on your face, and
Yes.
so that's the missing element. When it's not like oh, community warm fuzzy, we're all going to act correct. No, it's not. It's not that you won't mess up. It's do you have the tools to reorganize your life and receive forgiveness and restoration, and restitution, and get up and keep
And
going.
how about this,
Th-
Nathan?
That's a
I'm
part of
I'm
church
not sure
that
this
people
is
don't think about.
entirely fair. Yeah, but what about this? And I'm not sure this is entirely fair, but I think it seems there's some truth to it. You can set me straight. If you are not going to church because for whatever reason, you've had bad experiences, going to church is a painful experience for whatever reason, but you want to follow Jesus. But if you're on the outside somehow, you're not going to church, something a scandal happens. You find out about in this the latest case, you find out about Michael Tate. It's much easier for you to see that as a representation of the church, capital C church.
Mhm.
It's not it's not if you belong to a local congregation, because if you belong to a local congregation, you'll know human beings and their foibles and their weaknesses, but you'll know that that is not representative of the church and of every Christian. You'll know that this is a person's fall, and also, I think it's fair to say that this person did not fall alone. I think one of the structural elements are of particular concern to a lot of people nowadays because they look at the infrastructure surrounding a rock star and they say, a lot of factors had to be in place for this man to do this and get away with this. I think it's fair to ask those kinds of questions. But nevertheless, if you belong to a local congregation, you will know otherwise. You'll know that Michael Tate doesn't speak for the church. Yeah.
Mhm. So, Cameron, where do we land this plane? Um, we could say, well, it's now permissible to listen to any Newsboys song that was written before 2009 when Michael Tate joined, or
Mm.
you can go burn your DC Talk CDs, or I don't know how we want to get into the people ask us all the time about, Ravi's books and stuff.
Oh, sure.
Um,
Yeah.
there's that whole thing. And I think those are conversations we've had in the past. But to really think about if I'm getting weary from ingesting something that has no meaningful outcome or distinctive quality in my life and doesn't shape me at all, it just makes me worse. What do I actually need to do to change here? And was just reflecting on this on a sermon I was working on is that really we do live in a culture that values information and has a very low emphasis on virtue. And so are the things that I'm consuming making me more virtuous? Is this helping me live better? And sometimes an understanding of what's going on in the world absolutely is part of that, of just being an informed person. But if you're just being informed to be entertained or informed or be informed to talk about stuff, it's there's no real value to it. Are there things we can learn from other people's success and downfalls? Absolutely. But what am I doing with my time? What kind of person am I becoming by participating in joining into the cultural pastime of wallowing in our misery of being bored and fake appalled at what's happening? There's I can't we can't parse all that out right now, but I think just
Yeah.
see this as the opening volley of a conversation on what's actually healthy and what's actually helpful, and what do you actually need to know is subservient to what do you need to know in order to become what it is that God is calling you to be in the place where you actually live. That seems to me to be the challenge of, like, middle-aged adulthood that we're living in right now, Cameron, of figuring out
Mm.
how to
Yeah.
to work and to live and to grow in that individually, and then how to, treat our spouses and how to raise our children and how to have conversations with them about processing the information of the world and thinking about the characters that's being formed and developed in them, and, working on the things within our household, within our congregations, within our communities, and, um it's the ending of Middlemarch, right? That the world is really changed by people buried in unmarked graves that most of the world will never know about. And I think that is the type of thing to aspire to. If you haven't listened, the previous podcast that we released with KJ Carl Johnson from the C.S. Lewis Institute, where there's a great little clip in there where he said, we live in a culture that spends so much time thinking about the things that we can put on our resume, but really we should be living lives thinking about what's going to go in our obituary. And that's a difference between performance and information and skill and behind the scenes character of the things that people will celebrate in our lives. And so I thought that was a helpful little metric of thinking about what is it that I'm actually investing my time in and what are the meaningful distinctions that I need to focus on. And then I think if we can get clarity on that, then that'll help us parse through skimming the headlines and be like, meh, well, there's that, or really getting worked up about it or feeling the need to post about it or um, so, yeah, there you have it. Kind of podcasters who talk about current events and Christian hope, who also recognize that Christian hope trumps current events to the degree that sometimes they just, not out of apathy, but just out of obviousness, lose their pizzazz for us as items of interest.
You've been listening to Thinking Out Loud, a podcast where we think out loud about current events and Christian hope.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, book Nathan or Cameron, or if you'd like to support us financially, whether through a one-time donation or on a monthly basis, you can do so on the donate page at www.toltogether.com. That's toltogether.com. And please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and sharing this content with your friends. It really does help.